This little guy is the new DJI RONIN-SC. The Ronin-SC is very similar to the Ronin-S, it's just smaller and lighter, which is really great because the Ronin-S is my favorite gimbal right now. The only downside to it is that it's a little bit big and a little bit heavy. The Ronin-SC is just over half the weight of the Ronin-S at 1.1 kilograms versus 1.85 kilograms, but it still has a payload of 2 kilograms, which is really great. The Ronin-S is 3.6 kilograms, but 2 kilograms is still quite a bit of weight that this guy can handle. And you're gonna get very similar battery life. This guy, the Ronin-SC, lasts about 11 hours, whereas the Ronin-S lasts 12 hours. So very similar battery life. And let's look at what else is new on this guy. So probably the best new feature, in my opinion, on the Ronin-SC is that all the axes lock now, so you can lock them all. So when you're transporting it, it's not flopping around all over the place. One of my biggest pet peeves is with the Ronin-S, and if you have it strapped to a backpack or something, it's always just clanking around and it drives me nuts. No longer, now the axes lock, and that also protects the gimbal when you're transporting it. So that's a really great new feature, and this is probably the best locking mechanism I've seen on the gimbals. I really like it. You can just lock it and then just bring it into place and then it locks, whereas some of the other ones you have to kind of line up slots and then lock them. I really like the fact that the axes lock on this gimbal. Then there's some new features like Active Track 3, which in my opinion isn't the biggest deal. I'm not so interested in all the extras that go on a gimbal, but with Active Track 3 you can use your phone to essentially track different subjects or objects with the gimbal, which can be cool for certain specific instances, but for me, I would rarely use something like that, so that doesn't interest me too much. And then there's Force Mobile, where you can actually control the gimbal using your phone, kind of like a Mimic. Again, like I mentioned with the Feiyutech AK4500, I just can't see myself using that very often. I think if you're using a gimbal in this size and form factor, it's gonna be pretty rare that you need that kind of features. But again, it is nice to have if you ever do need that. There's also 2 different versions of the SC, just the plain SC and then the Pro Combo. The Pro Combo comes with a focus motor and a wheel for the focus motor. Again, for me, that's not something that I need, not something that I'm gonna use, so I would probably just go with the straight SC if it was up to me. And I gotta say, I really like the size and weight of this gimbal. If you've ever used a gimbal before, you know how tiring it gets using a gimbal, so every little bit of weight really counts. Just a little bit ago, I was running around with the Ronin-S and a 1DX on there, and it got heavy really quick. The Ronin-SC also has 2 really nice changes to the way that you balance it. So I was a little bit disappointed that there wasn't like a quick release plate for mounting on the camera, but what they did do is they put this little knob here to mark how far the plate should go on the gimbal. So that way when you're putting on your camera, all you need to do is slide it into place. It locks where you have that marker, and then all you need to do is just tighten it down, and then you have it balanced. It's easy as that. But they also did one other change, which I really like. And that's that instead of this plate just sliding around wild, it kind of has these little like slots that it stays in. So it's really easy to move it around and get it to the right spot. But then once it's there, it stays there. It doesn't slide around like crazy. And if you undo this knob, it's not gonna be sliding all around and you're not gonna lose that balance. So that's something that I really liked. Now the question is, this is smaller, lighter, the payload isn't quite as strong. What cameras can I put on here? And we were actually testing it out with the Canon EOS R, which is a fairly big camera, and the kit lens, the 24 to 105 f4. And it worked great, and this is a fairly big setup. The only downside is that you can't actually do flashlight mode, which is like having the gimbal like this, or undersling mode. So that is a big downer for me because I like those down low shots. Now you might be wondering, because you saw those low to the ground shots, how did we do those? Well, I actually figured, and I don't recommend this, this is probably not recommended by DJI at all, but I realized that if you hold down the sport mode, you can actually flip the gimbal upside down, and then you can do those low shots without having to put it into flashlight mode or undersling mode. So that's a way to kind of get around it. Again, I don't necessarily recommend that you do this, and DJI is probably not gonna like that I'm saying this, but that's how I was able to do those really nice low to the ground shots, which I love with a gimbal. And so that was a really great thing that I figured out, that even though the camera hits the back of the cradle, if you go to a certain point in the movement, you can actually just flip the whole thing upside down, which I had no idea. I don't know if you can do that on the Ronin-S, but I'm definitely gonna try that. And in the end, the most important thing with a gimbal is that the shots are smooth. So are they smooth? Is this a good gimbal? And I would say it's pretty dang good for its size, for its weight. You do notice that the motors aren't quite as strong as, let's say, the Ronin-S or some of the other big gimbals from other companies. Even with a bigger setup like this, the EOS R with the kit lens. Now the downside is I could never put my actual setup that I like to film on, the 16-35, onto this Ronin-SC. It's just too big, especially with the adapter. Maybe the 15-35 RF mount that's coming out, maybe that'll fit on there. So the Ronin-SC is in kind of a niche where you can't put too big of a camera on there. You kind of have to keep it fairly small. So that does limit you quite a bit. And you do want to make sure that your setup fits onto this gimbal if you're going to get the Ronin-SC. The cameras that I see this gimbal being best for are the Sony mirrorless cameras, just because they're a little bit smaller, especially if you're using smaller lenses. Something like the GH5 is probably really great because the GH5 is fairly light. The Canon M50 would be a great fit, but you can still go to a little bit bigger sized camera like this if you really need to. But I think for me, I'm gonna stick to the Ronin-S just because it can handle an EOS R with a 16-35. It can handle my 1DX2. It can handle the bigger cameras that I use a lot. But if you don't need to use a bigger camera, the Ronin-SC, highly recommend it. And that, I believe, concludes my first thoughts, my little first review on the new DJI Ronin-SC. Hope you guys enjoyed it.